A mammoth win for the Oklahoma Sooners in Waco and at McLare Stadium, a place where Baylor had never lost before. But that all changed on November 14th, and the Sooners win their fifth straight game and now become a factor in the college football playoff mix. No, they're not going to be in the top four come Tuesday, but they're not going to be too far behind either. We are coming on a little bit late for you insomniacs who are waiting for my report. I wanted to see how the Utah-Arizona State game finished. It went, I think, double overtime, and Utah got beat. Matter of fact, speaking of the Pac-12, so did Stanford. Both Utah and Stanford now have 2 losses on the season. I can't see the Pac-12 getting a team in the college football playoff because they don't have a team in that league undefeated or even with 1 loss. And speaking of losing, LSU, well, they got thumped tonight at home by Arkansas. So LSU, Utah, as well as Stanford, 3 teams that were ranked ahead of Oklahoma in the latest college football playoff poll. And of course, with the Sooners winning at previously unbeaten and number 6 rated Baylor, Sooners are going to move up at least 4 spots in the poll. At least 4. Of course, we'll find out this Tuesday for sure how high they move up. But you can rest assured it's going to be a pretty notable climb. And 2 games to go, both against ranked opponents for Oklahoma, playing TCU next Saturday. And, of course, getting OSU, the Cowboys, who survived in Ames, Iowa against the Cyclones on Saturday. Of course, the Sooners and Cowboys will play 2 weeks from now on November 28th in a game that could be the biggest Bedlam game as far as the national picture since 1984. We'll talk more about the future in a second, but, of course, we got to talk about the game itself and how the Sooners overcame that rough start. And they've gotten off to slow starts this season. The Tennessee game is proof of that. But, after having a rugged opening possession and after Baylor, moved the ball in virtually no time at all on their opening drive, went 80 yards, a lot of it on that Shock Linwood run. But who knew that would be his biggest play of the night? And we'll talk more about the Sooner defense and how they contained him in a moment. But, Baylor up 6-0 early, but the way that they did it and getting that loud crowd, which was, wearing, all black shirts, they blacked out the stadium for the most part at McLean, Saturday night in Waco. They got the crowd involved early, and you thought, okay, Sooners are going to really have to step it up, and boy, did they ever. And once again, the poise and the leadership, the spunk, the gritty determination, and fantastic decision-making for the most part on Saturday night by Mayfield really was important. But also, too, the fact that the Sooners' ground attack since that Texas debacle at the Cotton Bowl just a few weeks ago has improved dramatically. And you really didn't know how it was going to do tonight because now you're going against a defensive line in Baylor that's very experienced and very good. Of course, Sean Oakman, the all-everything, player on the Baylor defensive side. He was successful early on, but for the most part, OU had, him and the rest of that line well contained. I thought the offensive line did a brilliant job on Saturday. Perine with, nearly 170 yards on the ground. I thought OU being able to run in between the tackles, over the middle was crucial. Tough yards by Perine, and as we saw later in the game in the second half, had that huge run, I think about 52 yards, where not only was he able to break tackles, but he was actually able to get separation speed-wise from the Baylor secondary. So it shows you that Perine's more than just a tough back. He can move for a guy his size, and he proved it on Saturday, looking like that Perine of a year ago. As a matter of fact, he's not quite there yet, but he's close to 1,000 yards for this season. Impressive, right? And then we also saw Sterling Shepard, a monster game, and it was obvious that unless Baylor was going to tighten their coverage on Shepard, especially on those out patterns, Mayfield was going to continue to throw to him. Yeah, we mentioned last week Iowa State, it was more of a balanced receiving attack, and granted 5 or 6 Sooners tonight caught at least 2 passes, but it was Shepard who got most of them. And if you're going to be hooked to one receiver, it's for a good reason in the case of Baker Mayfield. Not because he's your only option, but because Baylor is not giving him that tight coverage. And, it's kind of like last year in the opposite factor where the Sooner secondary wasn't given, Baylor tight covers. They were loosening up in last year's blowout that Baylor administered to OU. Today, it was kind of a dose of Baylor's own medicine against the Bear defense for giving, the receivers too much cushion, in particular Sterling Shepard. And Shepard had a monster game, with the 2 touchdowns, both spectacular, especially that first one where he reaches for the pylon and gets it. At that time, OU had a 13-6 lead. And got to mention the defense as well. I said it earlier this week, okay? I said earlier this week on the matchup show that you're going to give up yardage, you're going to give up points to Baylor. You're not going to be able to stop him, even with the new quarterback in Jarrett Stidham, who has the potential of being a really good quarterback. But you could tell he's a freshman. You could tell that he hasn't started very much. It was just a second start. And this defense was better than the one he faced, the previous week against Kansas State. This was a defense that was going to give him problems, and the Sooners got to him a couple of times and put pressure on him at other times, even when they weren't able to get sacks, and they forced him into some mistakes as well. He threw a couple of interceptions in this game as well when he didn't throw any the week before and had 4 TDs. Tonight, he did have a couple of touchdowns, but you notice a couple of things about this Baylor offense tonight. They did get 34 points, but that's nowhere close to what they average per game, and they typically average over 660 yards of total offense per game, not even close to that tonight. The Sooners, they gave up some points, they gave up some yardage, but they also, too, didn't break a whole lot either. They were able to force punts, and at the same time, they were able to get some takeaways, too. The safeties, I thought, played a real good game for the Sooners with Ahmad Thomas as well as Stephen Parker. And you saw the defensive line after that opening drive that Baylor had where they marched down the field and scored in virtually no time. You saw tonight that the ground attack for Baylor wasn't anywhere close to what we've seen all season long. Shock Linwood, well, he was one shock tonight because after that opening series, he did not do much at all, forcing Baylor into third and long situations quite a bit. They converted a few, but not very many. If you notice this game, time of possession was big. OU had the ball about 35 minutes in this game as opposed to Baylor, who had it 25. Baylor was determined to try to make their ground game work. They didn't give up on it, but the Sooners, like I said, after that opening drive, did a marvelous job in containing the ground game with Tapper, and of course with Stryker, with the guys up front, and then they overcame the personal foul penalties, when they lost one of their defensive linemen in Matt Diamond, who was ejected, for kicking a player for Baylor, after an extra point that tied the game up at 13. And we'll talk a little bit more about the penalties in a second because, you had to overcome those in order to win this game. But the OU defense was able to get some big plays, a fumble recovery, the interception by Sanchez, and then at the end to put the game on ice, the Ahmad Thomas diving interception, in which Stidham, underthrew it a little bit, trying to hit the deep ball. The Sooners only trailed one time in this game, which was 6-0 early. And again, the Sooners, with Mayfield and company, persevered, and they also overcame 5 personal foul calls. Okay, one that it's 13-6. Baylor's driving. You get a stop on third down, but got a little too rough at the end of the play. Bob Stoops blows his top, and for good reason. So does Mike, because you give Baylor a fresh set of downs after you look like you're going to force a field goal. Well, give up the touchdown. Of course, the Diamond ejection, after the extra point. You're thinking, Baylor's got the momentum. It's a tie game. They're going to go into the locker room at halftime feeling real good. And then the Sooners march right back and get a touchdown to retake the lead to go up 7 at halftime. Very important moment in that game when things could have unraveled a little bit for the Sooners because they weren't playing discipline at that time, but they came back and marched it downfield in just under 2 minutes. So the Sooners seemed to have an answer, and of course, to me, most pivotal moment was at the end of the game or near the end, about 6 minutes left, and it was a 3-point lead for OU, 37-34, third and goal, and Mayfield, didn't force anything, read his options, had time, but when Baylor put pressure on, he finds Dimitri Flowers in the end zone, gets a 10-point lead because you don't convert right there. You have to settle for the field goal. You're only up 6, and you give Baylor 3 timeouts, and about 6 minutes ago, they can march it downfield and break your heart at the end. That touchdown really took a lot of wind out of Baylor's sail in that situation. So marvelous job by this Sooner team doing what nobody's been able to do, and that is win at that new stadium that Baylor calls home. So for the Baylor Bears, they're 8-1 actually, because they have an extra game left to go. They got OSU, TCU, and then they play Texas at the end. This loss, almost puts them out of the playoff chase, you'd probably have to say. And of course, they got to play at Oklahoma State. And by the way, the Cowboys looked like they were going to be goners. They trailed quite a bit to Iowa State and throughout most of the game, but got a late touchdown and was able to hold on 35-31. That was important because you need Oklahoma State. If you're Oklahoma, you need them to be undefeated. And of course, OU needs to take care of business against TCU next week in order for that Bedlam game for nationally to mean even more, because you can beat an undefeated Oklahoma State team. That looks even better on your resume. And like I said, the Pac-12 doesn't look like they're going to get anybody into that playoff. I can't see that happening right now. SEC will probably get a team in. Big Ten's going to get one in. Yeah, I figure Clemson will get in if they keep winning. And if OU can run the table, got a pretty good shot at getting in. Could come down to them and Notre Dame. But still a lot of football left to go. And you can play the speculation game all you want, but there's still a lot of football left. OU needs to take care of business. You got to think TCU next week is going to play a lot better than what they showed against Kansas. I mean, come on. You're a 45-point favorite to be the winless Kansas team. I know Boynton got hurt early and didn't return. You should still be able to name your score against Kansas regardless. Horned Frogs lucky to get out of Fort Worth with a 6-point win over a Kansas team that played today like world beaters, but TCU found a way to win. By the way, the OU-TCU game, 7 o'clock ABC, November 21st, OSU against Baylor, 6:30 on Fox. So both games on broadcast TV. By the way, both games in prime time. And if you're OU fan, feel great about this win. And no more talk that Bob Stoops can't win big games anymore, especially on the road. Case closed for tonight. And the Sooners, they are right now in the discussion as far as that college football playoff. They got to keep winning. And it wouldn't hurt if OSU wins next week against Baylor. So that way, you got 11-0 Oklahoma State and an Oklahoma team that will be 10-1, but at that time would have been winners of 6 in a row. And this college football season has been a wacky one. And at times it got wacky in Waco on Saturday. But the Sooners, they played terrific offense and played good enough defense against a Baylor team that was number 1 in the country in total offense, scoring offense. You can hold them to 34 and keep their total yardage well below its average. You've done a pretty good job. So great job, Mike Stoops. Terrific job, Lincoln Riley, offense coordinator. And to Bob Stoops, another big win. And the Sooners, yep, these final 2 games are going to be fun. They're giving themselves a chance. 44-34, OU beats Baylor. And they should get a pretty big boost in the latest college football playoff rankings, which comes out Tuesday. Speaking of Tuesday, probably that day or Wednesday I'll have my weekly matchup show of the Sooners and the Horned Frogs. Boomer Sooner.